Today we're going to be looking at the second batch of texts in the social issues series in our G10 mini anthology, which is on suicide. Now, as you know, there are two texts, 10A and 10B, and by now you should have an idea about the differences or the difference between A and B. So A generally is easier than B. Let's have a look at some of the questions in 10A. I've actually pre-selected some questions here to focus on. And in 10A, I'm going to be talking about questions 1, 2, and 4, and very, very briefly going over question 5 as well. Let's begin with question 1. According to the report by the Hong Kong Pediatric Society and the Hong Kong Pediatric Foundation, what do you reckon, that is, what do you think, is the most significant sign that not enough is being done by the government to deal with youth issues? Now, first and foremost, what is pediatric? It is basically the medical discipline that has to do with childcare and child-related illnesses. So that is the area of pediatric medical science. So there are two things that stand out here, the Hong Kong Pediatric Society and the Hong Kong Pediatric Foundation. And what you should do is you should go straight back to the text and look for these two terms. Okay, so we're going to go straight back to the text, and this can be found in paragraph 2, as you can see here. Okay, so what we've just done is we have scanned for the location of these two organizations, the Hong Kong Pediatric Society and the Hong Kong Pediatric Foundation. And it appears here in paragraph 2 that a report was released, and it wasn't simply a report, it was a damning report, which is a negative term. And so that basically brings us to the next paragraph. There was no designated section, not to mention a comprehensive child health policy. So what this implies is that the answer is already there in the text. And if we go back to the question, this is question 1, right here, we basically have to simply rephrase, preferably in our own words, what was mentioned in paragraphs 2 and 3. And on top of that, add your own opinion. As it says here, what do you reckon is the most significant sign, right, that not enough is being dealt with? Now, this particular question is given 2 marks, which means 1 mark will be for content, and quite likely the second mark will be for language, okay? Speaking of language, let's move on to question 2. Explain what breaking point means in paragraph 1. Now, this is a vocabulary-related question, so let's go back to paragraph 1 and check it out. Okay, so this is paragraph 1, and we notice how breaking point is used in paragraph 1. Parents are being pushed to breaking point. So you have to remember to look at this phrase in the entire context of the paragraph, how it is used in this paragraph. So you have to go backwards a bit. Children in Hong Kong have suffered a worrying decline in their mental health over the past decade, and parents are being pushed to breaking point. So this breaking point here is related to this decline, which is a negative connotation, right? And so that already gives you an idea as to how to tackle this question number 2. Obviously, it's not something to rejoice over, right? So you can start off by looking at the context here, seeing what the situation is. It is related to youth, and there is a decline involved. And so from there, you can start explaining what breaking point means. And the word breaking itself can actually suggest a few things, right? It could suggest something that is broken, something that is not working. And so when it comes to these sorts of questions, you will also need to rely on your background knowledge and your existing language skills as well to help you answer them adequately. Now, I'm not going to give away the answer. because I wanted to think about it. So I think I've given you enough pointers as regards number 1 and number 2, questions 1 and question 2. Moving along now to question 4. It can be inferred from paragraph 10 that. Now, the word that actually stands out here is inferred, which means surmised, okay? Whenever you're dealing with inference questions like these, you need to actually come to some kind of an educated guess. And the key word here is educated, okay? We're not talking about randomly making guesses. So let's go to paragraph 10, because that's what it wants us to do. Paragraph 10 is being referenced here. And let's see what paragraph 10 is essentially about. Okay, here we have paragraph 10. Now, there is a report being referenced in paragraph 10. And it says here, the report also found that the annual number of youth suicides in the city, which has fluctuated over the last 2 decades, tended to increase shortly after any temporary government measures were stopped. So when you look at this paragraph here, you can imagine a graph and 2 trends, right? There's the trend of youth suicides, okay? And there's an increase here, a suggested increase, when measures are stopped or when there's a reduction in the other. So there are obviously 2 things going on here, right? Youth suicides on the one hand, and government measures and money poured into these measures on the other hand. So there's a relationship going on. So you go back to this question here, that is question 4. And you will notice, and I'm not giving away too much here, you will notice that one of the statements points towards some kind of a relationship between 2 things, okay? That's all I'm going to say here for question 4. Question 5. I'm just going to very briefly talk about true, false, and NG or not given questions. Generally speaking, the true and the false statements are easier to handle and easier to tackle, okay? Simply because they're there, okay? They can be found in the text. Take, for example, 5 Roman numeral 1. There is no specific policy. I think we've actually looked at part of this at the beginning of the text. It was either in paragraphs 2 or 3. Let's have a look. There is no specific policy for managing children's health. Okay, so there you go. There was no designated section. So it's very clear there what the answer is. It's a black and white thing, right? Which leaves us with NG or not given. The NG ones, the NG statements tend to be the most difficult to tackle in true, false, not given questions, simply because they're not there and they can't be found in the text. And what the NG statements generally do is they force you as a reader to read the entire text, okay, inside out from top to bottom. So they tend to be difficult. I'm not going to tell you whether or not there are NG statements in question 5. You'll have to figure that out yourselves, okay? Now, moving along to text 10b. In text 10b, we're going to be looking at 4 questions, and they are question 8, 9, 10, and 13. I'm just going to take you through text 10b very, very briefly before I come back to the questions. This is 10b, and it's on how to keep teenagers safe from online suicide games, right? It's from the SCMP. It is not a very difficult text to actually comprehend, but the questions are generally more difficult than those in 10A. All right, so I'm now going to go back to the questions, and I'm going to begin with question 8, which is a vocabulary question. Okay, question 8 is a vocabulary question. 10B, question 8, here you go. The words culminate and alleged appear in paragraphs 1 and 2. Write 2 sentences in your own words, below that bring out the meaning of the words as they are used in the text, okay? Um, so context is important, meaning is important, and grammar and language are important too. So there are basically several ways of tackling this sort of a question. For those who are pretty good at English, they shouldn't have a problem coming up with their own sentences, okay? But for those of you who are not very confident in coming up with your own sentences, what you can do is this. You can go back to the text, look for these two words. Let's go back to text 10b now, and let's look for culminate and allege. Okay, here you go. Okay, culminates in killing oneself. Okay, alleged. Let's look at culminates first. A teenage suicide game is trending around the world. A suicide pact disguised as an online game challenges players to 50 days of risky tasks, including self-harm, and culminates in killing oneself. So the first step to take is to look at this word and see how it is used and get a handle on how it is used and try to actually come up with some kind of a meaning. Okay, this involves deduction. Okay, deductive reasoning. You can go through a process of using other words to substitute this word right here, culminates. So what could it be? It culminates in killing oneself. It results in, it brings about, it causes, something like that, right? The next word down there in paragraph 2 is alleged. Last November, an alleged ringleader. So for one thing here, with the word alleged, you know that it's an adjective, right? An alleged ringleader. So what might that mean, alleged? You could try replacing it with other words, right? Alleged. Um, was he found to be guilty? Was he suspected of being guilty, but not found to be guilty yet? Okay, meaning that, the evidence is not there yet or not quite there yet. So what could that word alleged be? Now, again, as I mentioned just now, if you're not very confident in your use of English, what you could do is you could see how these words are used here and taking note that alleged is an adjective, culminates is a verb, you can go back and sort of construct very similar sentences by using your own words, by perhaps replacing ringleader, for example, with alleged, with another word, right? An alleged ringleader, an alleged, an alleged ringleader is the one that is used in the text. You don't need to use that. In fact, you shouldn't use that. It could be an alleged crime boss. Okay, let's go back to the question. An alleged crime boss, an alleged suspect, or something like that. And from there, you can come up with your own sentences. I would actually, for average learners, suggest that you use simple words and simple sentences, but make sure that they're correct. Make sure that they're grammatically correct, okay? So that's question 8. Moving on to question 9, okay? Now, in fact, you'll notice that questions 9, 10, and 11 have something in common. And they have a commonality, which the questions in 10A or in section A or in the core part of paper 1 tend not to have. They all involve higher order thinking skills. In other words, they get you to think out of the box. They get you to synthesize information from within the text and from outside of the text, okay? They kind of force you to depend on your background knowledge as well. Take a look at question 9. According to the article, the Kenyan government wrote to Facebook, Twitter, and a number of media sites to warn them about the blue whale game. Why do you think it did this? Question 10, similarly, why do you think such attempts are not always met with success? Question 11, do you think? So there is a lot of thinking going on in part B2 questions, okay? Or in part B2 of paper 1. And generally that's what 10B is about. It is based on the B2 section of paper 1. So that's it for today. I'm not giving too much away. I'd like you to actually try this on your own.